Welcome to the Thought Decoder channel where we look at arguments, we teach logic, and we help you to think better. Today we're going to do a reaction to Joe Biden's recent comments that if you don't vote for him, then you're not black. We're going to look at his comments, look at his reasoning, critique his argument, then look at the context in which he made those comments in an interview with Charlamagne. And we're going to look at Joe Biden's comments as a response to Charlamagne's critique of him. So first, let's watch the clip.
To loyal voting bloc, and black people saved your political life.
Multiple.
You know,
Thanks so much. That's really our time. I apologize.
You can't do that to black media.
I can't do that to white media and black media because my wife has to go on at 6 o'clock.
Okay.
Oh, I'm in trouble.
Listen, you got to come see us when you come to New York, VP Biden.
I will.
It's a long way until November. We got more questions.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
It don't have nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with the fact I want something for my community.
So we see from this video that the interview was ending. One of Joe Biden's staff told Charlamagne that they would have to end the interview, and Charlamagne wanted to again invite Joe Biden for a future interview because he said that he still had questions. At which point Joe Biden says, "Well, if you still have questions, let me tell you something, Charlamagne. If you have to think about who to vote for, me or Trump, then you ain't black." So Joe Biden was specifically speaking to Charlamagne because Charlamagne had a critique of Joe Biden. And Joe Biden is aware of this critique that Charlamagne has on him. He mentions it at the beginning of the interview, and let's watch that clip.
Vice President Biden, how are you today?
Good to see you.
Same here. You know, I've been critical of you. I have a few things I want to talk to you about.
I know you have. Yeah. You don't know me.
No, I don't. That's why I want to get to know you today.
So Charlamagne's intention was to get to know Joe Biden personally, to know more about the man as opposed to the record behind the man. Because what Charlamagne did know about Joe Biden going into this interview was his record and some of the acts and bills that Joe Biden had not only voted in favor of, and those acts and laws that negatively affected African Americans, but Joe Biden also wrote one of the largest criminal bill in American history. It gave about $9.7 billion to prisons, etc., which really was the most influential piece of legislation that increased the incarceration rate among African Americans. So in American history, it gave about $9.7 billion to prisons, etc., which really was the most influential piece of legislation that increased the incarceration rate among African Americans. So that's the context. Let's look at what Charlamagne's response or Charlamagne's critique was. So we know that Charlamagne came into this interview with the critique of Joe Biden, and we initially see Biden's response to the critique as, if you knew me personally, you don't know me. So the reason you have a critique of me is because you don't know me personally. As if my critique cannot be based on something that is outside of my personality and my likability or etc. Which is almost an insult to people like Charlamagne, and within the context of this video, to African Americans in general, to think that, if I don't like you, it's because I don't know you, and the way all of my critiques must be based off of your likability. And I think that's why Barack Obama was so famous and popular. He's a very likable person. I completely agree. that he's likable. But what I don't like is not necessarily him, but a lot of his policies, a lot of his ideology that influence his decision making and his lawmaking. And it looks like Joe Biden is doing the same thing here. So let's look at, in particular, what Charlamagne's critique of Biden. So Charlamagne's first critique was that Democrats do not value or appreciate the Black vote. They really take it for granted.
Sean Combs, you might know him as Diddy.
Yeah.
He said what I believe a lot of Black voters, including myself, feel, and that's that Democrats take Black voters for granted.
How did Joe Biden respond? Well, he didn't really. He said that he comes from the largest, the 8th largest city or state with the African-American population. He talked about how when he was in high school, he went to work, one of the only white kids who had a job because he wanted to work in the project so he could understand. He talked about how, in the primaries, it was predicted that he would not win, but he won like 96% of the Black vote. And I'll comment on that in a second, but just let me play this clip.
I don't want to vote. I just want to know what candidates will do for us in exchange for our votes. The same way young progressive Latinos, the LGBT community,
Absolutely.
We want the same thing. Do you feel like Black people are owed that from the Democratic Party?
Absolutely, Bob. What did I say? Remember when I said Biden can't win the primaries?
Yes.
I kicked everybody's out. Excuse me.
I won. Like that. I need you to say that. You did what?
I won overwhelmingly. I told you when I got to South Carolina, I won every single county. I won a larger share of the Black vote than anybody has, including Barack. I increased the vote in Virginia overwhelmingly by 70%. Look, what people don't know about me is I come from a state that's the 8th largest Black population in America. The 8th largest. I get 96% of that vote for the last 40 years. They're the folks, as they say it my way, brung me to the dance. That's how I get elected every single time.
So let's look at the question that Charlamagne posed, and let's look at his response. So the question was, do you think Democrats take the Black vote for granted? To which Joe Biden responded, he had more votes in the primaries than Barack Obama, that he came from a state with the 8th largest African-American population. But how does that relate to whether or not Democrats take the Black vote for granted? I don't even see that that's related. It seems like he just began to throw out random facts. And when you really think about it, if there is such a large population of African Americans, how could you not pander to African Americans if you wanted to have some type of political office? It would seem like that's what you would need to do. So stating that there are so many African Americans in the state and that so many people have voted for him for the longest, that doesn't show that he doesn't take their vote for granted. That could be an argument for why he would take their vote for granted. So he didn't respond to that at all, but he does mention, I think, what one of Charlamagne's real objections is in this next clip. He kind of anticipates it and begins to talk about a few things.
Me way ahead, and it's not just, I hear this, oh yeah, old Blacks are with Biden, but youngs aren't. Look at the polling data. Polling data, let's say it's off by half. Come on, man, give me a little break here. This is where I come from. I got involved, I came home from college, and I had a job with a really fancy law firm out of law school. And my city is the only city in America occupied by the National Guard, the military, for 10 months when Dr. King was shot. And I had this fancy job, a kid coming from a lower middle income household. I quit and became a public defender. And I stayed in that community. I was the only guy when I was in high school. I had a job, a country club kind of job at a swimming pool. I was the only white employee in the East Side because I wanted to work in the projects, because I wanted to understand That's how I got involved in politics. That's what this is all about for me. It's about equality. It's about dignity. It's about treating people with respect. And so, you know, and you take a look at my record, people talk about the crime bill.
So if we think about it, that could have been true. That might very well be true. It might have been a point to where he, in his past, where when he first began, that he wanted to understand African Americans or people living in the projects, which may be a generalization to speak of people who live there as African Americans, even though they may have been like a large majority. They probably wasn't everyone. It could have been. So, but that still doesn't respond to whether or not he's taking the black vote for granted. He could have started off very well, but I mean, decades as a politician, a career as a politician. He has a lot of reasons why he would want to get votes and want to stay in power after he began to get a taste of it.
Crime bill did increase mass incarceration. Other things increased mass incarceration. And the reason why, if you go back and look, and I know you talk about it, you go back and take a look. That's why you had the vast majority of the Black caucus at the time supporting the crime bill. Almost every major city black mayor supported the crime bill because blacks were getting killed overwhelmingly as well. And what happened when that crime bill? It had 4 or 5 really important things. It had the Violence Against Women Act. It said drug court. Don't send anybody who has a drug problem to jail. Send them to rehabilitation, to a drug court. It had in it that had the assault weapons ban, getting rid of assault weapons, getting rid of the number of rounds you could have in a gun. It also had in it a whole range of other things, but had things I didn't like.
So here we go. This is the interesting piece. He's made a claim. The claim was the crime bill did not increase mass incarceration. Then he says other things did. Hey, Joe, what other things? That's what I like to know. So what were those other things? Then he begins to list some positive developments with the crime bill, some of the important or things that he thought were positive that were included in the bill, which is, I mean, that's just great. But notice at this point, Charlamagne hadn't said a word. He didn't ask about Joe's record. He just said he had a critique. Are you taking the vote for granted? So this is really Joe Biden speaking from his consciousness. Something that's on his mind. He's trying to make a case. I mean, who is he trying to convince? Charlamagne hadn't asked that question.
Clinton wanted to put in a deal where, in fact, 3 strikes and you're out. I opposed that 3 strikes and you're out bill. I opposed the position taken that saying that you're going to have any mandatory sentences. But on balance, the whole bill, what happened was it did, in fact, bring.
So he's made some other claims. So here we find something kind of interesting, for lack of a better word. I'm saying interesting. To be completely frank with you, I think Biden's lying. I think he's lying. He said he opposed mandatory minimums. He's also said that it was Bill Clinton wanted to put the 3 strikes law in. Now, if he opposed, let's just think about this. If Joe Biden opposed these things that were in the bill, right, how would we know? One way it seems that he could vote against the bill and argue that although the bill contained some good things, it had some bad things that he didn't really agree with. So he decided not to vote for the bill. Or he could vote for the bill and say, although it has some bad things in it that I don't agree with, I'm going to vote for the bill. So what did he do? Did he vote for the bill with the 3 strikes law in it and with the mandatory minimums that he said he went against, but there's no record of him going against it? There's only a record of this. So here we see right here, look at right here. Zoom in. So the 1994 ominous crime bill. We have Joe Biden voting yes. So this is votesmart.org, and we're currently looking at Joe Biden's voting records. So he voted yes for the bill that included the things he said he opposed. Does that make sense? Now, what was in the bill that he voted yes to? Here is the HR 3355, Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994. Let's scroll down. Section 2405 sets mandatory what? Minimum prison sentences for illegal drugs to minors or using minors in drug trafficking activities. What about 2408? Provides for life imprisonment without release for drug felons and violent criminals convicted a 3rd time. That means after 3 strikes, you're out. But these sections are things that Joe Biden opposed and voted for when he voted yes for this bill. So he opposed them, but he voted for them because he voted for the entire bill. Interesting. So Charlamagne still showed some skepticism after Joe Biden said all of those things about how he stood against bills that he voted for, but he was against the things that were in them, but he still decided to vote for the bill. Charlamagne began to become skeptical and asked him specifically, weren't you a part of like the 1984 and 1986 bills? Let's take a look at it.
On balance, the whole bill, what happened was it did, in fact, bring down violent crime in Black communities as well.
As well as what? Maybe as well as increase the incarceration rate of African Americans.
And guess what? The fact is, prison population didn't increase. 94% of every prisoner in jail is in a state prison, not a federal prison. No federal law. And here's the deal. The one thing I opposed in that bill was people wanting to give money to state prisons to build more prisons. I opposed it. But the point was, on balance.
Okay, so another interesting statement that he's made. He also opposed the funding of state prisons in this bill to build more prisons. So, but I think you can figure out from this pattern that we've noticed that this funding was a part of this bill to the tune of something like $9.7 billion. Look it up. Look up 3355 crime bill and look how much money it gave prisons to expand and to develop their prison system and their prisons. So again, he has this. I know it had minimum sentences in it, which affected African Americans. I know it had the 3-strike rule that increased incarceration by African Americans. And I know it gave prisons billions of dollars to expand, but I was against it. Although I voted for it, I was against it. And I stand to this day against it. And if you don't believe me, look at my record. Wait a minute. I know my record says yes, that I voted for it, but I was against it. So if you don't believe me, because I'm telling you. So you see where this is going. Joe Biden is kind of running out of ammunition. He's really just destroyed himself with all of these statements that he's made, because we're able to look at his record, what he keeps asking us to do, and look at his record and critique him on the basis of the record. But if we don't really know him, we wouldn't know that he's not taking advantage of the black vote, since he lives in a majority or the 8th largest African-American population state in the United States. And since they vote for him, African-Americans vote for Joe Biden in crazy percentages, that means he's not taking advantage of them. So let's continue looking and see what Charlamagne had to say about it.
Everything from the assault women's ban to the violence against women ban to the drug courts, they were important. And now look what we can do. Look, I've been pushing, along with my colleagues in a black caucus in the United States Congress, we should change the entire, and I've been doing this for a while, change the entire prison system from one that is punishment to rehabilitation. There's only a couple things everybody has in common in jail. One is they were the victims of abuse.
So you've been pushing for to change the prison system from punishment to rehabilitation. When you say you've been doing that, for how long? And when did you start? Did you begin like that, or did you end like that? I think what's interesting is the question of whether or not he's taking the black vote for granted. Because when we consider the population that he was a part of, how the numbers were so large, or such a largely African-American state, the 8th largest according to him, when we consider that fact, then we see that he would need the black vote and would need to understand black people. So his story about how he wanted to understand African Americans doesn't really help his claim that he's not taking advantage of them, or doesn't really help that. Doesn't really demonstrate that. But I think it is interesting that he was running for president, and since he was running for president, this crime bill, he not only voted for it, but he was one of the original authors of the bill. He was one of the original authors of the bill itself. Look at this New York Times article. Joe Biden's role in 90s crime law could haunt any presidential bid. This was written in 2015. Now, notice the New York Times is a liberal news outlet. They're liberals. So we have no reason to be suspicious of what they say about another liberal, right? So it's not like you're going to a person's enemy to hear them say the worst things about the person and using that as evidence against that person. I'm using a source that agrees with the ideology of Joe Biden. Largely the democratic liberal mindset. So let's see what they say. This was written by Nicholas Fondos. So when Joseph R. Biden Jr. became the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee in 1987, a few months ahead of his first and ultimately unsuccessful presidential campaign, he told aides his goal was to enact legislation that would take a comprehensive approach to reducing crime. As the ranking minority member of the committee since 1981, Mr. Biden had helped pass 2 bills establishing mandatory minimums for drug offenses. He not only was this the bill that established minimum mandatory, but he had helped to establish 2 other bills. Maybe it's the 84 and 86 bill that he's mentioning here. But as chairman, facing high violent crime rates, a crack cocaine epidemic, and accusations by Republicans that his party was soft on crime, Mr. Biden wanted holistic reform. So what's the theory here? The thesis is that Joe Biden wanted to establish his place as a presidential candidate, a strong presidential candidate, by winning over those who may have been on the other side. So what is he doing? He's using legislation that he knows that the other side likes to win their vote, also that he could become the presidential candidate of the United States. So at the expense of African Americans, to win more appeal from both sides, Democrats, because as he said, the African Americans had already voted for him and would vote for him with crazy numbers of a percent. So he just had to win the Republicans to secure his seat as a strong presidential candidate. Unfortunately, he was wrong about that. But it shows that if this is true, if this is the reason he did it, it shows that he would take the black vote for granted, right? Because he was willing to vote for a bill that negatively influenced African Americans, and watch this, that he knew was bad for African Americans. That's why he said he was against minimum sentences. Yeah, you were against it in your head or your heart, but you voted for it at the expense of African Americans because you wanted to be president. Because he wanted to be president. So African Americans, the black vote was just, literally took it for granted. If this is true, but I don't know, I'm not a mind reader. But this does seem like a compelling case that that's exactly what he did. But so Mr. Biden, okay. Oh boy. So let's see the rest of this.
So their kids were, or their mother was. Number 2, can't read.
Here he's talking about like what people in prison have in common. What does that have to do with it?
Why does it not make sense to have African Americans who are getting out of prison serve their time, everybody for that matter, be able to have public housing? Why doesn't it make sense?
So now he's pandering to the black votes. Now this is something he may be good at, knowing, understanding who the people he wants to reach are and knowing what they want, right? So he learns what they want and talks to them in terms of what they want. So he tells them basically what they want to hear, until what they want to hear is at odds with what he wants. And then that's when he's willing to abandon them, those people, specifically Black people and African Americans.
Jill has to use this, but I've talked too much. I apologize.
No, I gotta ask you though, you know, why so much resistance on admitting the crime bill and other legislation you are a part of was damaging to the Black community? Because we had Hillary on a few years ago, and Ms. Clinton said that the crime bill, we made a lot of mistakes with that, and she wanted to atone for that by becoming the next president. Like,
she was wrong. What happened was, it wasn't the crime bill. It was the drug legislation. It was the institution of mandatory minimums, which I oppose. Mandatory, I oppose
I thought you was a part of that in '84 as well, the Comprehensive Crime Control Act.
So Charlamagne has looked at his record, and he's saying the same things I'm saying. And he said, I thought you were a part of that, because he actually wrote the 1994 crime control bill, but again, those two sections, 2405, which set mandatory minimums, and section 2408, which gave life in prison for three with third offense of a felony by a violent offender, or a drug-related offender. Those were in the bill you voted for. So it's not as though, that's something, this is a different bill. That's something different. He's not confused. He's looking at the same bill that you voted for, that you said yes for, but you were really against. Okay? So it seems like the person who's confused is Joe Biden.
Establish mandatory minimum sentences for drug offenses.
No. What happened was, what you're confusing is what happened was the Black Caucus came to me and said, look, I did this study when I was chairman of the Judiciary Committee. We looked at every district of the 10 court districts in America, federal court districts. And we found out that if you got arrested for robbery and convicted, and I got arrested for robbery and convicted, it was the first time, you went to jail an average of 13 years. I went to jail an average of 3 years. So there was this whole move, same time for the same crime. So no one based on their color could go to jail longer than anybody else for the same crime. So what happened was, there was a judicial selection committee setting up that how you deal with making sure that the sentencing process is taken out of the hands of prosecutors saying, I'm going to want 12 years, 13 years for you, and 3 years for me. The end result.
Wait a minute. Houston, we have a problem. At 9:23 in this video, Biden says that he opposed the bill. Let's look at it.
It did, in fact, bring down violent crime in Black communities as well. And guess what? The fact is, prison population didn't increase. 94% of every prisoner in jail is in a state prison, not a federal prison. No federal law. And here's the deal. The one thing I opposed in that bill was people wanting to give money to state prisons to build more prisons. I opposed it. But the point was, on balance, everything from the assault women's ban to the violence against women ban to the drug courts, they were important. And now look what we can do. Look, I've been pushing, along with my colleagues in the Black Caucus in the United States Congress, we should change the entire, and I've been doing this for a while, change the entire prison system from one that is punishment mandatory sentences. But that things I didn't like. Clinton wanted to put in a deal where, in fact, 3 strikes and you're out. I opposed that 3 strikes and you're out bill. I oppose the position taken that saying that you're going to have any mandatory sentences.
So there he says he opposed the position that you're going to have mandatory sentences. But look at what he says at 1337. He actually gives the story of how he created the bill with the Black Caucus. So he's lying. Like right on video. He's contradicting himself. He said he didn't have anything to do with the mandatory minimum sentence. Then he says he created. Why not just tell the truth the first time? Yeah, I created it, but those weren't my intentions. Why not just say that? So, Joe, I mean, can I really trust you, Joe? Like, that's the thing about a liar. Like, once they begin to lie, it's like, oh, okay, what are you not lying about?
Different times. They have to be within a framework. That's why that has been changed. And while I was vice president, I helped Barack. We reduced the prison population federally by like 38,000 people. 38,000 people.
Wrong time again. So 1221.
Of the 10 court districts in America, federal court districts. And we found out that if you got arrested for robbery and convicted, and I got arrested for robbery and convicted, it was the first time, you went to jail an average of 13 years. I went to jail an average of 3 years. So there was this whole move, same time for the same crime. So no one based on their color could go to jail longer than anybody else for the same crime. So what happened was there was a judicial selection committee setting up that how you deal with making sure that the sentencing process is taken out of the hands of prosecutors saying, I'm going to want 12 years, 13 years for you, and 3 years for me. The end result of that was the unintended consequence, which we changed, Barack and I did, was the fact that you, in fact, all of a sudden, you could not lower my sentence or your sentence.
Because there was a minimum sentence. So now he went from saying how he didn't have anything to do with it, he opposed it, to he created it and it was an unintended consequence. Interesting stuff.
You are convicted of a crime. No one should be going to jail for on the use of marijuana, not in leading.
So now he's pandering again. He's saying things he thinks people want to hear, like if you do a violent crime, there should be no 3 strikes, and you should be able to be going. No one should go to jail for marijuana, et cetera, et cetera. Stuff he believes many African Americans would want to hear, especially those who have that type of lifestyle. Let's get to the nitty gritty, though. This was the big shebang here.
I don't know if you saw the op-ed in the Washington Post by some of the leading Black women voices in this country, and they feel since Black women are such a loyal voting bloc, and Black people saved your political life in the primaries this year, they have things they want from you, and one of them is a Black woman running mate. What do you say to them?
What I say to them is that I'm not acknowledging anybody who is being considered, but I guarantee you there are multiple Black women being considered.
Wow. There are multiple Black women being considered for vice president. Let's just take Joe at his word. He's so reliable. He's so trustworthy. I'm being sarcastic.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a
In New York, VP,
because my wife has to go on.
you can't do that to Black media.
Okay. So here, the lady who was facilitating the interview, I think she was behind the camera. She begins to speak and tell Charlamagne that they have to wrap it up. They have to go.
Thanks so much. That's really our time. I apologize.
You can't do that to black media.
I can't do that to white media and black media because my wife has to go on at 6 o'clock.
Okay.
Oh, I'm in trouble.
Listen, you got to come see us when you come to New York, VP Biden.
I will.
It's a long way until November. We got more questions.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
It don't have nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with the fact.
So, and then we get to the controversial statement that if you have a problem figuring out if you're for him or Trump, you're not black. Maybe I'll do a video on who has the better record related to African Americans, Joe Biden or Trump. That's coming next. Thanks to Tim Scott, especially, by the way. So, I mean, so what has he shown? He has not shown that he doesn't take the African American vote for granted. He has actually shown that he needs it, and that he gets it in large numbers. That he comes from a largely African American state, which would make sense if you wanted to be a politician to win that vote. So I don't know how she showed that he wasn't taking it for granted. He could have shown by showing his record, right? But when he spoke about his own record, the main critique of his record towards African Americans, he began to lie. Oh, I was against minimum sentencing. Then switching from that to say, oh, I created it, but that was an unintended result of the minimum sentencing section 20. I have it written down. Section 2405. That was an unintended consequence. So if you ain't black, so if you're black, then vote for me. If you don't vote for me, you ain't black. So you can't show by your record that you don't take the black vote for granted. Your record actually shows you causing great harm to African American community. Let's see what else he says.
I want something for my community. I would love to see.
Take a look at my record, man. I extended the voting rights 25 years. I have a record that is second to none. The NAACP.
Second to none. What is the criteria? Is this like the second to none? Are you number one in the worst voting record for African American support, or are you the best record for African American support? The whole point of his critique was that he did look at your record, and you claim not to be a part of things that he believed you were a part of, that I see, because I'm able to research after this interview, that you were a part of. So is he taking the black vote for granted? I'll let you decide.